Welcome to welcome to today's presentation. My name is Alice Hogue and I'll be your instructor. I'm going to start with my signature Cajun joke, and in this one I'm going to do it with my accent. Marie died and she went to the pearly gates and St. Peter met her there, and he says, "Oh, Marie, I'm so happy for you to see me." He says, "But listen, I can't let you into the kingdom of heaven." And Marie says, "Well, why not?" He said, "Well, you got to take a test to get into the kingdom of heaven." And she said, "Okay, what's the test?" So he said, "How do you spell love?" She said, "Oh, that's easy. Love." St. Peter said, "Welcome to the kingdom of heaven." She came into the kingdom of heaven. Then a couple of weeks later, St. Peter went to Marie and said, "Hey, Marie, the boss asked me to run a couple of errands. Can you watch the front gates for me?" So she said, "Sure." So she goes to the front gates, and wouldn't you know it, here comes that good-for-nothing husband of hers, Boudreaux. And Boudreaux is there at the pearly gates. And so Marie said, "Boudreaux, man, I just left you and you were fine. What happened?" He said, "Oh, man, I got sick, Marie, and I didn't make it," he says. And she says, "Well, got some bad news for you." He said, "What's that?" And he said, "Well, I'm not going to be able to let you into the kingdom of heaven." And he said, "Well, why not?" She said, "Well, you got to take a test to enter into the kingdom of heaven." So Boudreaux said, "Well, what's the test?" And Marie says, "How do you spell Czechoslovakia?" All right, I'm glad y'all like that. Okay, so let's begin with an industry overview. Um, Now, I just heard from Leslie that the Beverly Hillbillies was not working properly, so I've just updated it. It should be fine by now. But usually what I would do is I would have them watch the Beverly Hillbillies first before they watch this Oil and Gas 101. But it's no big deal. I mean, you can go back and watch it, and then, some of this will make sense that's not. So no biggie. So this is Oil and Gas 101. Now, the reason I teach this industry overview, it's not really a part of anything a division order analyst is going to do. But when I was a division order analyst, I could tell you everything that came across my desk. I could tell you what to do with that piece of paper. I knew how to do the work. But I never really looked up. I never really looked up at the industry as a whole. I couldn't tell you how you drill a well, what the different parts of a well are. Um, those kind of things that are just kind of, how they refine gas, how they get gasoline, how do they refine the oil to get gasoline, how does all that work? And so, and also, and I think I told you this last time, this is with respect to knowing what's going on in your industry. You have to look at the big picture. And so that's what the purpose of this industry overview is. I'm going to walk you through the things that I didn't know until I started doing this work. And one of those will be the history of oil. Okay, so that's the foundation for it. Now, it's set up as the top 5 lessons that are learned from the Beverly Hillbillies. One is how oil is discovered. The other is the role of the landman. 3 is the importance of title opinions. And 4 is kind of the refining process, is I guess how you would describe that. And then at the very end, I'm going to give you the life cycle of a well, of a lease, and a division order, so we can put all these pieces together and see how they interrelate in a department or in a company. Okay, so let's begin then with how oil is discovered. If you look in the Bible, there are passages that talk about using what they call pitch in the Bible. One example is Noah's Ark. God said, build an ark and daub the inside with pitch. Pitch is what you see here. It's this bubbling crude. That's why I use this picture, because, in the Beverly Hillbillies song, Jed was shooting at a bubbling crude, and up from the ground come a, what? Bubbling crude. Okay, so So that was in the Bible. Another one was Moses in the book about Moses. I think that was Exodus. It says she put him in a papyrus basket, put it with, she took a papyrus basket, daubed it inside and out with pitch, put the baby in the reeds upon it, and sent it down the river. So again, we see a use for oil all the way back to biblical times. So the point I'm making here is that this is a resource that has been with us literally from the beginning of time. And there are these naturally occurring oil seeps in the world. This is one in California. So, initially, especially when we talk about Spindletop, you'll see that in the history of oil. That's how Patilla Higgins thought there was gas under the earth, because he could literally push his stick into this gunk, and he thought that, there was oil and gas under there. So I just want you to recognize that, even though the Beverly Hillbillies is pretty stupid because, up from the ground come a bubbling crude, that can in fact happen. Now, it doesn't happen that much anymore because we've tapped most of the resources that we have. But I just want you to recognize that this resource goes all the way back to the Bible. It goes back to the American Indians. The American Indians used it to make decorative beads. They used it to waterproof their blankets. And then Confucius, long before Christ was born, was using the substance to light like lamps. So that is the beginning of oil. It literally comes with the beginning of time. So, and I'll talk to you about where oil comes from when we talk about, what was that topic I was going to do for you? I can't remember the name of it. I'll have to come back to that. Okay, so lesson one is, first of all, how oil is discovered. So today it's not discovered this way, but it has been discovered in the past. So lesson two is the role of the landman. I usually, if I'm doing a live class, I will say, who is the landman in the Beverly Hillbillies? And there's different men that are involved in this process, and so, a lot of times they'll get it wrong. Well, the landman in the Beverly Hillbillies, and you'll see it when you watch it, is this guy. Now, this guy is named Mr. Brewster. And Mr. Brewster is the one that actually negotiates the lease with Jed Clampett and, tells him about, how much money he's going to be making. So the duties of a landman are, first of all, they do what we call chaining title. Does everybody know what chaining title is? Raise your hand if you don't know what that means. Okay, so everybody pretty much knows that. So chaining title is when the landman goes to the county courthouse, and he goes to the county courthouse and he looks at every single conveyance that was recorded on that piece of property. So it's basically any transaction that has happened on a particular parcel of land. The landman will go and look through all these documents to determine who is the mineral owner. So the mineral owner is who we take the oil and gas lease, not the surface owner, but the mineral owner. So that is the chain of title. If you think about it as links, and every link would be a document about a transfer of interest. So, you could start with, at the beginning where they have letters patent, and I have letters patent is the first time the government gave land to, the first person that owned it. It's called letters patent because, you and you alone own it. So then what happened to it after that? There was another document that conveyed it to so-and-so, and then there was another document. Each of those documents is a link in the chain of title, and so you trace that all the way to today, so you know who the landman is. So you know who the mineral owner is. The other thing the landman does is he negotiates the leases, and you'll see, you won't see it in this video, but they are the ones, and when I did this job, it was really a fun job. I mean, you go and call people and, hey, can I come over and talk to you about leasing your land? And they would say, sure, and I would go and I'd have a cup of coffee, they'd give me a piece of pie, and it's the best sales job in the world because you're saying, hey, if you sign this paper, I'll give you whatever it is, $300 an acre, and it's usually a check like $20,000 or something like $10,000. All you got to do is sign that paper, It's Easy sales job. Now, the other thing about a landman is that they are a PR point person. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that most of the landmen that I know are pretty good-looking people. They're not only, good-looking, but they're well-dressed, they're well-groomed, they're well put together. And that's because oil and gas companies hire people that are going to be a good representation of them. So the landman really is a PR point person. For a lot of these people, their only contact with the oil company is going to be through this landman. So we're very picky about who we hire as landmen. They've got to be good with people, and they've got to be, they've got to look good. They can't be scary, when they go and knock on your door. Okay, then the last thing that the landman does is he negotiates farm-ins and farm-outs and joint operating agreements. That's what happens when you have producing property, and so he's basically negotiating this with other oil and gas companies. So he's negotiating the lease with the mineral owner, and this he's negotiating with other working interest owners. Other working interest owners. Okay, all right, so now let's look at lesson 3. So lesson 1 was how oil is discovered. Sorry about that. How oil is discovered. Lesson number 2 is the role of the landman. Now lesson number 3 is going to be the importance of title opinions. Now the reason I talk about this in the Beverly Hillbillies is because in the Beverly Hillbillies, what happens is Mr. Brewster, gets a lease from Jed Clampett. They don't do any title. They don't do any chaining title. He just knocks on the door, and whoever the man that answers the door, that must be who the mineral owner is. Right? Right. No, that's not right. It could be, who could it be? Y'all tell me, who else could it be? Whose property could it be besides Jed's? Well, it could be Ellie Mae's property. Apparently Ed's wife, his wife died, and now Ellie Mae is her sole remainer. Maybe it's, was her mother's separate property. It could be Granny. Why isn't that Granny's property? It could be Cousin Pearl. Maybe they're renting this property. You just don't know until you do a chain of title, a title search. So that's how we get to, I'm sorry, somebody's telling me they can't get in. I guess I'm going to have to, where was I? Ellie Mae. Okay, Granny. All right, maybe they mortgaged it. Maybe it belonged to the bank, whoever. Maybe it belonged to Pearl. So what a landman does is he does what we call a quick and dirty run sheet. He is looking at each of those documents in the chain of title, but the only thing he cares about is there a mineral interest that was conveyed? And if so, what's that fraction? So I can figure out who the mineral owner is. Now, once we decide we want to drill, now we really want to take more time than just, a run sheet to decide whether we're going to drill on somebody's property. So for the drill site area, we are going to research title on that specific area because that's where we're going to put our rig. If we go to all this trouble and put the rig up and then we find out, oh, we don't have a lease on this, that's going to be a huge problem and expense. So we then hire an attorney, and it's a licensed attorney, and they will do a title opinion. Now, a title opinion is basically the attorney guaranteeing that the mineral ownership is how he has it spelled out. So as he has it spelled out, he's guaranteeing that this is who the mineral owner is. Now, this is important because if there is an error in there, or if there is some error that causes damage to the oil and gas company, then we can sue that attorney for malpractice. So he's giving his stamp of approval, seal of approval, and saying, okay, I've looked at everything that the landman brought to me, and I've looked at each of the documents in the chain of title. Now, sometimes an attorney will, well, I don't think they do this that much anymore, someone was telling me, but a lot of times they'll have an attorney we'll actually get what we call an abstract of title. An abstract of title, there's these companies called abstract plants. And what they do is they literally go to the courthouse every day and they get a copy of every instrument that was recorded that day, and they take it back to their office, and then they organize it under legal description. This is really helpful in Texas because in Texas, the only way you can look up a property is using the grantor grantee index or a chronological listing. So the having this is very important to us because it really helps us out. Okay, so that's called an abstract. Now, it's usually a huge, if you think about maybe 5 reams of paper, okay, that's how much the abstract is. I mean, that's how thick it is, all right? And the reason we are using it is because we don't want to pay the attorney who's charging us by the hour. You know, we don't want to pay him to drive to the county courthouse, to wait in line with all the other landmen to pull books because we're paying him by the hour. So we'll just go to one of these abstract companies and we'll ask them, can I have all the documents on this chain of title? So for example, here it would be the Southwest, where is it? Southwest of the Southwest of Section 17, Township 12 North and Range 32. And so that is the abstract. Now these abstracts are expensive. They're about $10,000, $20,000. So my understanding is they don't use them that much anymore, but I do want you to be familiar with what they are. So the title opinion is basically tracing what the landman did, and then he's digging in deeper, going into more depth about that chain of title. So it's an opinion that's rendered by a licensed attorney that sets forth the ownership. It's an opinion rendered by a licensed attorney that sets forth the mineral ownership. Now, the process is, you know, sometimes you'll see original title opinion, and you'll see second supplemental title opinion, third. And what happens there is once we have, there's something called requirements in here, and that's it. Those are clouds on title. And once we gather the documents that the attorney needs to fix this defect in title, we'll give all that back to the attorney and he'll let us know if that satisfies the request or not. So then we'll issue a second supplemental title opinion that says, yes, this is satisfied, this is satisfied, this is satisfied, but this isn't satisfied. And then, you know, then the landman will go back and get other affidavits, and then they'll come back and they'll render a third supplemental title opinion. So that's what those iterations are. They're just the back and forth between the landman and the attorney to make sure that, you know, there's no defects in the title before we actually drill on it. Okay, and so those are the different types. So that's the other thing it teaches us is the importance of title opinions. Now, how many of you are familiar with title opinions? Raise your hand. Okay. Okay, well, I won't go into too much detail, but this is the title opinion. And what it states on there is the date, the legal description, the client's name. Now, this is important because whoever's name is on here, that's who the privilege applies to. There's something called an attorney-client privilege. And that says that if there's anything wrong with this title opinion, Brewster Oil Company has the right to sue that attorney under the attorney-client privilege. But if Brewster Oil shares this title opinion with anybody else, he's just destroyed the attorney-client privilege, and then he may not go back and you know, claim that it was privileged communication. So that's why companies are really careful. I had one student today send me a text, you know, why do they have this language at the bottom of the email of some people that this is confidential and privileged information? And it's because of things like this, because we want to protect that attorney-client privilege so that we have then grounds to sue this, this attorney. And then it lists the documents that are examined. And then it tells this is certified through this certain date, and sometimes it'll even give, you know, the time of day by 12 noon. Then it sets forth the ownership listing. That's the mineral owners, the surface owners, any non-participating royalty interests. Then it shows what the leases are, and then you have your comments and requirements, and that is basically the clouds on title is under the comments and requirements section. Okay, so that gives us the opportunity then to look at lesson 4. Now, this is my chance to give you a history lesson. I never miss a chance to give you a history lesson. So what I want you to understand is before 1852, can anybody tell, thanks Karen, Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe, can anybody tell me how Americans lit their homes before the invention of kerosene? Anybody? So before they lit their homes with kerosene, what did they use? What did the pioneers use? What did Abraham Lincoln use? Good. Okay, so animal fat is one. That is literally a whale oil. Now, how do you get whale oil? You just go out and milk the whale, right? No, you have to kill a whale, a gigantic whale. So it's, incredibly dangerous, and so that makes that incredibly expensive. So the other thing you have is candles. Candles are another way of lighting the home before there was actual these kerosene lamps. But they were dangerous. It was an open flame, and it was also limited to the length of the candle. All right. Then in 1852, a Canadian inventor named Abraham Gesner figured out a way to make kerosene. And what he did was, this is another lesson learned in the Beverly Hillbillies, is that he basically borrowed a page from alcohol distillery. So, when Granny goes to make her moonshine, what she's doing is I'm a terrible artist, okay, but she's got a big tank like this, okay, and underneath it she's got fire. And then what she puts in here is her corn or her mash or whatever she's using. And then there's a series of coils that come from that and drip into a bucket. Now the coils are the condensation that forms because it's being boiled, and what drips into the bucket is kerosene, is moonshine, okay? So Gesner took this and he used the same thing, but instead of putting corn in there or mash in there, he put oil in there, and what came out through this condensation, what evaporated up and dripped out into this condensation, was kerosene. Now, kerosene was a dramatic discovery in the United States. Really, it's a dramatic discovery worldwide, because it went from being, just able to see to a certain point to kerosene, where if any of you have been on a camping trip and used a kerosene lantern, they really glow brightly. So it was huge, and it literally lit up America. So they finally had a way that they could turn off and turn on that was easy. It was contained in a container, so it wasn't an open flame. And, it was just a great invention. It really changed the course of the world. And so because of that, oil began to become very important. Now, before that, they were using, these oil seeps like for an eye salve or for a skin condition, those kinds of things. But after the discovery of kerosene, they realized we need to figure out a way to get that oil out of the ground. And so they hired Edwin L. Drake. Edwin L. Drake hired somebody named Uncle Billy, and they strike oil in 1859 in Titusville, Pennsylvania. So now this is the first oil boom, okay? We figured out a use for oil that didn't exist before, and now it does. And all of a sudden, we've created a market for oil. So Drake starts drilling, and he's just doing what they use for saltwater drilling, because saltwater drillers were complaining that there was some oily substance that was coming up. And they literally, you'll see this in the history of oil, but they literally took a piece of timber and rammed it, until it hit bedrock at 69 feet. So that was the first oil boom. And Titusville became, like a crazy town. Everyone came in. There were, tons of houses that didn't exist before. It was the first strike oil. It was the first boom. Now, right away, John D. Rockefeller saw the future in this. And what he thought was that if I can build these refineries and I can, produce this kerosene, I could be a very wealthy man. So he immediately starts setting up these refineries in Pennsylvania. And so, boy, we were having a big boom with oil, and John D. Rockefeller was getting rich, 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 and then all of a sudden, Thomas Edison comes along and he invents the light bulb. So this was the first bust. Okay, boom and bust. The light bulb was invented. What happened to the price for oil? It went all the way down to 2 cents a barrel. And that's where it stayed until Henry Ford came along. And Henry Ford created this, 1901 Spindletop. Now, before this, oil was, in the Northeast. It was in Ohio, it was in Pennsylvania, it was in those areas of the country. Anyone who thought that there was oil in Texas was crazy. It belongs in the Northeast. There's nothing in Texas. And so Patilla Higgins drilled this well, and that one well doubled the production of oil in the United States. That one well doubled the production of oil in the United States. Can y'all still hear me? Bear with me. Okay. Sorry about that. Looked like I lost y'all there for a minute. Okay, so we were talking about Spindletop. So it was the biggest gusher since Drake in 1852, and it alone doubled. It actually doubled the amount of oil in the United States. So it was this huge, dramatic discovery. And that paved the way for Henry Ford to come along and develop his Model T in 1908. And then once again, what do we have? We have another boom, right? Another boom. Okay, it's not going to let me write that. Okay, so that is just a little brief history of oil. Now, what I want to do next is I want to walk you through the 5 steps of petroleum. Let me say one more thing on this. This is a boom and bust industry, and you need to recognize that going in. When it's a boom, it's fantastic. The money's great. When it's a bust, it's really depressing. Right now, we're in a bust. So I remember in the 80s, I saw this bumper sticker that said, "Lord, please send us another oil boom. We promise we won't blow this one." So, but it will come back. It starts with this boom here, and then bust with the light bulb, and then boom with the Model T, and then bust, boom, bust, boom, bust. So hang on, don't think, well, I'm just going to quit this profession because, the price of oil is too low. I'll never make any money. It will rebound, but you do have to wait for it. So have patience. Okay, now that gives me the opportunity to walk you through the 5 steps of petroleum. This is the piece that I didn't really understand going into the work I did as a division order analyst. So these 5 steps are, and this is, by the way, on www.howstuffworks, and it is finding and drilling, producing, transporting, refining, and then products. So let's look at each of these and see what each step represents. So the first one is finding and drilling oil. This is what I was trying to think of in the beginning. But oil is formed from the tiny remains of dead sea creatures and dead plants. That's why it's called a hydrocarbon, because it's got a carbon, something that was living is where it comes from. So these are called hydrocarbons. So these are formed under the earth. This happened like with the dinosaurs and anything that died, and then there was another layer of earth, and there was heat, and that created more pressure, down below, and it kind of caused those dead sea creatures and those plants to kind of liquefy into what is oil and gas. So in order to find this oil and gas, what we usually use is something called a thumper truck. Now, a thumper truck goes out onto property. This is also called shooting seismic. The thumper truck will go out to the property that we're looking at drilling, and he's got this thing that literally hits the earth, and then here are these geophones, and they have a geophysicist inside here, and they are measuring these sound waves. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to figure out what it looks like under the earth. What are all these different layers under the earth? So as an example, if, I have a granite coaster in my hand. If this thumper truck hits that granite, it's going to bounce right back off of it. So you're going to have a pretty short wave. But if it's like sandstone or limestone, and that's where a lot of oil is found, if you think about it going through sand, that thumper truck going through sand, it's going to go longer. It's not going to just hit the sand and bounce back. It's going to go through the sand. So that's what they're looking for, and they're trying to create what it looks like under the earth. And so this is what the ultimate goal is. The ultimate goal is to have, see how the different layers are set up. And what they're looking for is these little traps, these oil and gas traps. And so this is what the well log will look like, or the seismic will look at. And I've actually sat down with geologists before and watched them do this. But they will usually, if they see an area that kind of sticks out all of a sudden, that's an indicator that there might be sandstone or limestone there. And if there's a hard rock here and a hard rock there, then it might be trapped. This might be an oil or gas trap. So you see, again, we've got a little bump here, a little one. And so the geologist will color in, this blue-green here, will color in where he thinks there's, potential gas traps or oil and gas traps. Now, what he's looking for is one of these gas traps. And you can find it one of two ways. One is called an anticline, or a fault. So if there's a shift in the earth, a break in the earth that you can identify through these sound waves, that's going to be an indicator that oil and gas may be under the ground there. The other thing they're looking for is they're looking for there being some kind of impermeable rock, and then something soft, and then another impermeable rock. That is what forms the little gap, if you will. And so once they find that, they will then test for oil and gas there, or drill for oil and gas there. So it might be granite, and then in here is sandstone, and then granite again, and it bumps out like it did. And this bump out is called an anticline. That's their indicator that there might be oil and gas under the earth. Okay, so once the geologists are convinced there's oil and gas under the earth, we send a landman out. The landman negotiates the oil and gas lease with the mineral owner, and then we can then prepare that drill site by, first of all, clearing out all the trees. Now, why do we clear out all the trees? Well, because oil companies don't like the environment. No, that's not it. The reason we clear out all the trees is we're going to have to put this giant pad down, and huge dimensions, and there's going to be roads built and trucks going in and out, and we need all the space. And so that's why we clear the land. That's preparing to drill. Now the next step is when we get the rig, we set that up, and sometimes we have to wait for a rig because they have a limited supply of them. But if we can get our hands on a rig, then we can go ahead and set up that rig. So this is the derrick here. Oops, where's my pen? There it is. Here's the derrick here. This, kind of structure that goes like this, all the way to the top. That's the drilling rig. Now, attached to that is a series of hoses, and I want you to understand what's going through here. So this is the drill bit. Now, is that showing y'all? Can y'all see that turning on your side of the screen? Yeah, so that is the drill bit. Now, here's another kind of close-up picture of the drill bit that I thought was good. So what happens is drilling mud is pushed down the hole through this casing, and then these are like hard, they are used to grind the rock. So a lot of times they use diamonds, and it's just, literally, if you can picture that, I know, crazy sound effects. But if you can picture just grinding into the earth, what would happen is it would get pretty hot down there, because you're just grinding into earth. And so they have what's called drilling mud, and drilling mud goes down the center of this drill bit and then comes out the sides and goes back up. And so what it does is it cools those drill bits, and then it also forces the cuttings up. So here's some cuttings over here. Okay, so what I want you to understand, though, is something called the shale shaker. So this is what we call a mud pit, okay? And it is a pit that is dug, and it's usually lined. And what they do is they come up with a chemical composition for mud. Now, I like to tell this story about, I was at a Boy Scout camp out one time, and I was talking to one of the dads, and somehow we figured out that we were both in the oil and gas industry, and he was a drilling mud engineer. I had never even heard of that. So I said, well, how does that work? What do you do? And he says, well, my job is to make this chemical composition so light that the oil can flow out, but heavy enough to prevent a blowout. So that's a pretty important job. That's the great thing about this business. You'll always learn something new about this industry. You'll never know every single aspect of this. So that's what they do with the mud. So it's not just like water and dirt, like, you used to make dirt pies. It's actually some chemicals involved, and they're measured, and scientists are doing this. I mean, it's scientifically done. So what happens is the mud flows up through here, and it goes down through these pipelines, and it goes all the way through the drill bit, and then forces those rock cuttings, like right here, forces those back up. Those rock cuttings then go through what's called a shale shaker here. And the shale shaker is like a screen, if you will, like turn a screen door sideways, and it's just shaking out what these cuttings are. And so the geologist will want to see what kind of rocks are coming out there to see if, he's right, if the sound waves were correct. So that's the shale shaker. Now then all those rocks then go into another pit, the remaining mud goes back into the mud pit, and then again continues to flow through the well. So that's why drilling mud is so important. Now, does anybody know who invented the drill bit? Howard Hughes Sr. So for those of you who are not familiar with him, who was the guy? Leonardo DiCaprio played him in The Aviator. Actually, that was his son. So the father was the one that created the invention, but his son got the benefit of it because he was rich. He could date all these Hollywood movie stars and have planes and have all kind of fun things to play with. But that's where he got his money, because his dad invented the drill bit. All right. Now, once we have production, once we have oil coming up, and let me just say this too, because with fracking, they're talking about the water table. I just want you to understand, every time we drill, this is in a steel casing, okay? The drill bit is in a steel casing. So as we drill, we come back and cement along the sides of that. So that steel is in place, and then we cement alongside of that. And that's how we protect the water table. So I just want you to understand that. That's how casing works. Okay, so now once we have actual production, we really don't have to do anything, because the production just naturally flows from the earth, because it's, it was under pressure for so long. And now, if you think about a water hose and, it's got water in it, and then you hit it, it's going to naturally flow up. You don't really have to suck it out or anything. So what we do is we put what's called a Christmas tree on here. And, this one's even painted green. But I guess someone saw these series of balls and thought it looked like a Christmas tree. Okay. And then the oil will naturally flow from that. And then it will come out there and it will go through a flow line. And then it will either get treated, or it will go directly into a pipeline, or it could be trucked away. So that is the Christmas tree. And these valves, people come out regularly and check the valves. And again, these valves are trying to get the pressure in place so there's no blowout. Okay, So then the next step is that's producing. Now, as it starts getting late into the field, or the field starts getting older and older, that pressure is going to be reduced, and it's going to be harder and harder for us to get that oil out of the ground. So at that point, that's where we would put that Horsehead well that you see all over Texas. And so we've got this Horsehead that goes up and down, and what it's doing is it's sucking, like if you imagine a syringe, sucking the water out, and then the oil out, and then sending it to a flow line. Now, what we do then is, because this oil down here is all thick and gunky and there's no pressure anymore, we will put another well on there. And this is a steam injector well. This is also known as enhanced recovery. And what we do is, down this hole, we have steam, and the steam, or hot water, or it could be CO2, all different kind of things. We'll get that oil flowing back up again, and then we're sucking it up. So that's what you see in all those Texas lands as you're driving to, Dallas or Lubbock or wherever you're going. But that's what they are. And it's just you've seen it before. It just goes up and down, and it's literally sucking this up and then shooting it out. So here's an example of what we call casing, and then tubing is what's in here. So 2 layers, the tubing. The casing is the concrete, the tubing. So as we go, we keep going down with the tubing, and we keep concreting along the sides as we go. So this is all cement here. And then there's the sucker rod, and this is where the oil sand is that it's trying to get it to flow toward. So the other thing I want y'all to recognize is that it's in sandstone. There's no pool of oil under the earth. You have to find it kind of embedded in the rock, if you will, surrounding rock. And so you're trying to get the oil to flow up through this Horsehead pump. Okay, so that is finding and drilling and producing. The next step is transporting. The United States has over 220,000 miles of natural gas pipeline in the United States, and this is what it is. So when we're talking about gas, well, we're talking about oil. We can either put oil in a pipeline, or we can put it in a truck and just literally truck it away. But we can't do that for gas. For gas, we've got to put it into a pipeline, because if you don't do that, it's just going to evaporate, right? It's gas. So we put it in one of these tubes, and we have an engine called a compressor engine, and that compressor forces that gas through the pipeline. And here's just one of what they look like in, this is Alaska, I believe. So that is the transporting piece. And where are they transporting it? Well, they're transporting it to, those refineries in Baytown. This is what that looks like. And so what this is they are doing what Granny did, which is they take, not the mash, but the crude oil, and they heat it up, and this is how they get all these products. This is where gasoline comes from. So what happens is these different types of products will evaporate at different rates. Okay, so if you have something like gas, this gas right here, this naphtha here, that's going to float all the way up to the top and come out this line, and there's a container that holds that, probably one of these things is holding, and that's all the carbons and gas. Naphtha, for example, naphtha is the solution that they use in dry cleaning, and so that is going to float up. So at the bottom you have the gunkier, the stuff that you don't want to evaporate, like the oil that you want to run in your car, you want that to keep cycling through your car. And so that's heavy gas oil or lubricating oil. And then this is residual. Now, each of these represents a carbon chain. So, you've heard it called hydrocarbon. That's because it's a carbon with 4 hydrogen attached to it. So this is 4 carbon, this is 8 carbon. And as it gets heavier, that means there's more and more carbons in that chain. So let me just show you I'm not a scientist, but I want you to understand how this works. This is called the cracking unit. The cracking unit. And what the cracking unit does is, we can only have so many of these long hydrocarbon chains. There's a limited market for it. It's, used for cars and diesel and all that kind of stuff. So if they want to create more of these lighter hydrocarbons, what they'll do is they'll take this long hydrocarbon chain and they'll put it through this cracking unit, and that will split this long hydrocarbon into two hydrocarbons. And that creates ethene and alkane. So that's what this long chain is. They put it through the cracking unit, it cracks it and creates smaller units. So that will be on the final exam. What is a cracking unit? Okay, now you can take these hydrogen chains, form ester linkages. And if you put all those ester linkages together, you get a polyester. That's right. So I usually say, if we took all the oil and gas out of this room, most of you would be pretty embarrassed. And why is that? Because most of your clothes is coming from a byproduct of oil. The elastic in your underwear is a byproduct of oil. Your contact lenses are a byproduct of oil. And then the carpet in the room is a byproduct of oil. The curtains in the room are a byproduct of oil. The pen that you're writing with is a byproduct of oil. The cell phone the parts of a cell phone is a byproduct of oil. So that brings us to the last stage, which is the product stage. I did not realize when I started this work that all of these things were products of oil. So for example, this is Crayola, right? Crayola comes from the Greek. Okay, I know what's happening. Got it. So Crayola comes from the Greek cray, which means chalk, and ola, which means oil. Crayola, chalk oil. You've heard of linoleum, something you put in your house. When I worked at ExxonMobil, at the top of that building in Houston is called the Petroleum Club. And all the employees like us would say, we're going to eat in the linoleum club, which is for the riffraff. So that's another words that come from oil, anything with oleo or ola in it. Another one is there was a pharmacist who watched his sister-in-law take a spoonful of petroleum jelly. Petroleum jelly comes from petroleum. And she heated that over a candle. And the candle, the petroleum jelly turned into a black soot. And so she took that black soot and she stuck her finger in it and she applied it to her eyelashes. And so the pharmacist was looking at this and he said, I wonder if there's a market for this. And so since her name was Mabel, it was called Maybelline, lean meaning oil. So that is how makeup is worn. That's where makeup comes from. It's a byproduct of oil. Maybe she's born with it, maybe she's not. Another thing that's made from oil, and I have a history, I have a listing in your modules, everything that comes from oil. But some of the things that I didn't recognize was like the artificial heart valve. The artificial heart valve comes as a byproduct of oil. You think about all the medical devices that are made with plastic. That is a byproduct of oil. So it's really no exaggeration to say that our industry really does save lives. Prosthetics from the soldiers coming back from the wars, those are made of a byproduct of oil. Balloons are made from a byproduct of oil. We know gasoline, shoes, film, this is kerosene down here, the phone, including the cell phone, a beach ball, anything that's plastic, the coating on prescriptions, and also they can use the formulas to create aspirin, to create antibiotics. I'm not sure how they do that, but I've Googled it before, and this is like paint thinner and a tennis ball. So I want y'all to make sure you look at that list and see all the things that come from oil. People can complain all they want about the oil and gas industry, but if it wasn't for us, the quality of life in America, in the world really, would be dramatically worse. So yes, we are contributing. The work that we do is very important. All right, so those are the 5 steps: finding and drilling, 2 is producing, 3 is transporting, 4 is refining, and 5 is products. So now I want to turn to the life cycle of a well. So once the lands are leased, the landman has already gone out and leased the lands, what happens to the well is, first of all, we have to get permission from the state. We can't do anything until we obtain a well permit. The state is interested in spacing, so they only want one well for so many acres. And so if you're planning to drill a well, they want to make sure you're not so close to other rigs that are in the area. And so you survey those lands and decide where you're going to put everything. Then you clear the land, then you set up that rig, then you start the pumping or the drilling process. And then once you have production, then the next thing that happens is we wait till the end of the life of the well, and we realize that we need to pump something else in the earth to help it move. And this is called secondary and tertiary recovery. This is tertiary recovery. And then production ceases, that well is plugged and abandoned, and the well site is cleaned up, or severe penalties are imposed by the state to the oil and gas companies. All right, so that's the life cycle of a well. Now let's look at the life cycle of division orders. Of a lease. Okay, so the person that is analyzing that oil and gas lease is known as a lease and title analyst. They are usually part of land administration. You have your lease side and you have your division order side. When I was at Exxon, they had landowner relations and royalty owner relations. So the landowner relations was the anything to do with the lease, and that's how the duties were set up. So when we talk about the lease and title analyst, remember, the landman has to do the title search. He negotiates the leases. He gets it executed. He gives them a bonus, and then he records it. Once that lease is recorded, it's going to be sent to the land administration group. Now, sometimes they send the unrecorded lease to the land administration group, and it's their responsibility to get that lease recorded. Now, the land administration, the lease and title analyst, will then assign a lease number to that lease. And then they'll literally read that lease line by line, word by word, and if there are any legal obligations in there, we're going to make sure we capture those in our system so that we don't lose our right to be on the property. And one of those is that you have to pay the rentals timely. If you pay the rentals late or not enough, the whole lease is void. So now you're going to have to renegotiate with these people, and now they can ask for a higher price because they know you're definitely drilling. So that's one of the responsibilities of a lease and title analyst. The other thing they do is they pay what's called shut-in royalties. If we're dealing with gas, we could have production, but we don't have anyone that's buying it yet. So we're setting up like marketing contracts. And also we're building a pipeline. Remember, we can't truck it away. So there's going to be a delay where the mineral owner is not getting anything, but the well is really producing. And so we pay them a small royalty called a shut-in royalty because the well is shut in for a period of time until that pipeline can be built. And then the last one we call maintenance. This is also known as changes of ownership. This is done both by division order analysts and by lease and title analysts. And then the last stage that happens in the life of a lease is there is a release of lease that's filed of record. If there's no production or if production ceases, this is what happens at the end of the life of a lease. Now let's go on to division orders. I need to know, by show of hands, how many of you have been doing this work for less than 5 years? Less than 5 years. Okay. So I'm just going to go over briefly what the division order is. When we talk about a division order, we're talking about this form. Now, this is a form that was put together by the National Association of Division Order Analysts, and it's called the Model Form Division Orders. It was adopted in 1995. What happened before is every company had their own division order form. And so attorneys in any, company would not allow their land administration to sign anything without reading it first and without running it by the title attorney. It was a tedious process because every one of these division orders, we had to make sure they didn't sneak anything in, and then we signed something and, there's something in there that we didn't intend to be in there. So it took up a lot of time from a lot of people in a lot of different companies. And that's why they all came together and said, look, let's just agree. This is the form division order. This is what it's going to say. If there's anything else that needs to be said, you need to put an addendum on it. And so that's the division order. And it basically, this kicks in, division order work kicks in when there's actual production. And then we need to pay those people, those royalty owners. And so it'll say who the owner is. We'll assign a property number to that well, and then we'll give it a name as well. And then we'll say who the operator is, what the county and state is, and what the effective date is. Now here we will put the actual property description, and we'll let them know what kind of production we're seeing, what they have. Is it oil production? Is it gas production? Is it coal bed methane? What is it? And then here again we put the owner name and address, and this is where we put what we call an owner number. There's usually a department in land administration that their sole responsibility is creating business associate numbers, and that's why we call them BAs. That's what an owner number is. So every mineral owner has their own unique number, and then we put the type of interest, and here's where we put that long decimal, 8 decimal out to the 8th decimal place. And so what we want, and then it says the undersigned certifies the ownership of their decimal interest, and they sign this. Then what we want the owner to do is to sign this instrument. And the reason we want to do that is because if they ever say, hey, you've been paying the wrong person, or the decimal isn't right, we can always say, well, you signed it. You were authorized to sign this. Now, some states, what we used to do is we would put everybody in suspense, and then we would send the division orders out, and anybody that sent the division order back in, we would put them in pay status, and we would start releasing them. But now, some states have got a hold of that, and they say, wait a minute. They signed a lease with the landowner that said if there was production, they would get royalty. They didn't say if they got production and then the mineral owner signed a division order. No, it's the lease itself gives them the right to drill. The lease itself gives them the right. So that is, gives them the right to the royalty. Okay, and that's a state like Louisiana has that. So we still send out division orders to Louisiana residents, and we really want them to sign it. What we really also want is their owner ID and their owner's signature here. Because if we don't have that, we're required under federal law to withhold a certain amount, and that's a bookkeeping nightmare. So we tell them, look, you don't sign this, or you don't at least provide us with your Social Security number, then we're going to have to withhold some of the royalty payments. Now, we still send it out to Louisiana, and we just hope they're not, very savvy, and they go ahead and sign it. A lot of people, don't know that statute is out there. Okay, so then let's move on to let's put this all together. Back to the job responsibilities of the divisional order analyst. So what they do is, different companies do this differently, but some companies like Anadarko, I know, when I worked there, the divisional order analyst would order the title opinion, and they would then receive that title opinion. They would go through each of the requirements part of it, what we call the clouds on title. And that title opinion will say what you need to fix it It's usually some kind of an affidavit. So the division order analyst would be responsible for hiring a broker to go out and fix it. The division order number, then the division order analyst is responsible to calculate the DOI, and then they issue the division orders, and then they start paying the royalty owners. And the last thing they're responsible for is change management, what we call maintenance. So if there's any change in ownership, then that is something that has to be done legally because we're dealing with real property. So those are the job responsibilities of a division order analyst. Now, if I have some more seasoned people in here, what would you add to this list? Or do you think this is accurate? Okay, so it must be a pretty good list because I'm not getting any suggestions. All right, so let's put it all together, and then this will conclude the webinar. But, you know, what it starts with is geology getting out there with their thumper truck. And they thump the earth, and they get a series of sound waves. That's called shooting seismic. And by the way, when they shoot seismic, what they do is they have like a, if you think about when you kick a football, okay, it sits in a little plastic three-pronged something, okay? That's kind of what this seismic looks like. They put these little prongs into the earth, and then they step on it, and then, you know, there's a series of wires connecting it. So that's what it looks like when they shoot seismic. So in land, then they would run the title, they would lease and pay the bonus to the landowner. Then it gets to the lease analyst, and they assign a lease number. They analyze the lease for legal obligations and input it into the system. Then they pay the delay rentals, the shut-in royalty payments. Then they assign division order numbers, calculate division of interest, monitors changing interest, orders the title opinion, issues the division orders. And then revenue is what we haven't talked about yet. Revenue accountants are the ones that get the checks. So, you know, we're not always the operator. So if some other company is operating, they're going to give us our share of our working interest, and from that we will pay our royalty owners. But the problem is a lot of times what comes up on the check is different from what we have set up in the system. The well is named differently. So we as division order analysts have a responsibility anytime we're setting up a new well to be crystal clear, you know, give that revenue accountant as much information as you can so that they can identify, you know, connect the check to the division order. And so that means you put things like, you put the division order number in your description for the setup of the well. You would put, if you know accounting specific number, you would put that in there. You would put the API number. That's something that the American Petroleum Institute, every well has a unique number. And so you would put that in that description setting up the well. And that way the revenue accountant is, you know, you make his job easier by making it clear which check goes to which division order. Then at the end then there's production, and then once production ceases, we put that secondary or tertiary, that second well next to it, and shoot steam or CO2 in there. And then the well is plugged and abandoned, and there's an environmental cleanup for the well site. And then at the end of the life of the lease and drilling, the lease analyst will release the lease of record. So that is putting it all together. So let's look at what we talked about today. We talked about the top 5 lessons learned from the Beverly Hillbillies. Then we talked about the 5 steps of petroleum: finding and drilling, producing, transporting, refining, and products. Then we looked at the specific life cycles of a well, of a lease, and of a division order. And then we put it all together in one slide on one page. So that concludes our presentation today. Are there any questions? Okay, well, if there are no questions, this concludes this webinar, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.